Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to your 15-minute flip classroom. That's right. We're going to have a 15-minute flip on this stuff just to get you at the part of what you need to know, right? So what your stuff is going to be on tomorrow when we're talking about the little, multiple choice thing that you're going to take, okay? The little multiple choice kind of quiz / test. We'll call it a quest, if you will. The thing that you need to know is you're going to need to know from the end of World War I to the end of the last test up until the end of this flip, right? And the reason why this end of this flip is going to be a really good place to stop is just because we're actually going to be talking about a massive turning point in World War II, right? Now, what's going to happen right now is I'm going to clip in an old flip from last year that I really, really like, that I used a lot, and it's going to actually discuss a couple big things, right? Big things to focus on in the little clip that's actually coming up is the first phases of World War II, right? It's going to be focusing on what happened, the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact. Another little thing you're going to need to focus on is what's going on in Spain, right? There's this guy named Francisco Franco, and he actually was a fascist dictator in Spain, and the German forces under Hitler and also under the Italian forces under Mussolini had actually aided this fascist dictator in his growth of power and stuff like that, right? And how he's going to take over Spain and actually lead them through a fascist dictatorship for quite some time going into the 1950s. Now, the thing about it, though, is as well, we're going to focus on the Blitzkrieg, methods used, and we're also going to talk about how the election of Winston Churchill as Prime Minister in Great Britain is going to be not a major turning point, but a very important piece of this war. We're also going to discuss as well the evacuation of Dunkirk, Lebensraum, the goals of Hitler and stuff like that. But just pay attention, and a big thing we'll be focusing on is the occupation of France by the Nazis, right? So go ahead and watch that stuff, and then come back, and I got about 5 extra minutes backed up on the end of it that we'll talk about some other things, okay? So I'll see you all in a sec. Second, a German boot steps foot into Poland, right? So when this occurs, the U.S. and the Allies now come entering into the war. However, the first phases of the war are a dramatic Axis victory, right? So in the European theater, the Axis powers, known by their tripartite pact in September 27th, 1940, when they actually created this thing. So it was Germany, Italy, and Japan, right? That is your Axis powers. The Allies are France and Britain, but what about Russia? Why is Russia, or the USSR, also known as the Soviet Union now being led by Stalin, who is purging people left and right, why are they not in the alliance? Why is France and Britain alone in this alliance? Well, it's because the Nazis and the Soviets signed this thing known as a non-aggression pact on August 23rd, 1939, right? The Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact created a set of provisions, right? And the provisions that Stalin and Hitler made together, which I know Malaya knows about this because I know you referenced it one time in class. The provisions were to split up Poland and Eastern Europe, to trade German industry goods for Russian grains, and don't aid either enemy in the side. So they are to stay uninvolved against. So basically the Soviets are not allowed to aid the British or the French in any way, right? And the Nazis will not aid anyone against the Soviet Union. Now there's a big reason why this happened. Because the Soviets had a plan. They wanted to go fight a different war, right? So the Soviets were in the middle of a different war. This freed them up to go fight Finland in this thing known as the Winter War, right? And the Soviets come in, rush into Finland, and regardless of losing a heavy number of people and a heavy number of armaments, the Soviets take over the eastern area of Finland in this Winter War and end up winning, right? And the U.S. remains neutral, right? So did the Axis learn from World War I? Did these guys learn that World War I was fought so poorly, and that's why the Central Powers lost? You bet they did. The Axis realized to prevent the two-front war, sign that Nazi aggression pact with the Soviets, right? Now you can focus your entire force on France and Britain. And they also wanted to prevent a trench war. So they adopted this thing known as the Blitzkrieg, right? The Blitzkrieg is known as the Lightning War, right? That is what it means in German, okay? To avoid a stalemate of trench warfare, the Axis powers used heavy machinery-based attacks, right? The Luftwaffe, known as the German Air Force, tanks rolled in an immediate invasion, and they went aggressively and quickly, hence Lightning War, right? And this is going to devastate the Allied armies, and it's going to devastate their civilians' ability to fight this war and keep producing war materials, right? Because now the German Luftwaffe has single propeller, not turbine powered, but single propeller planes that can travel further distances. They're more maneuverable. They have fighters and long-range bombers, right? So the Blitzkrieg is extremely effective, mainly due to practice, right? Because the Germans and Italians had already used this. So something we didn't talk about that I'm just bringing up briefly is that the Spanish Civil War lasted from 1936 to 1939 when a fascist dictator by the name of Francisco Franco used his military to attack and take over his own country, right? And the Germans and the Italians aided him by using their Blitzkrieg tactics. So when World War II began, the Germans and the Italians already knew how to use the Blitzkrieg, and they went after him, right? And it causes not only psychological damage, but also physical damage, right? And you have to understand that in the Eastern... Nah, we're going to move on with that. They're still invading China. All right, so now, anyway, so don't need to write that last one. But what Hitler's goal was is this concept known as Lebensraum. Lebensraum is living space, okay? He believes that he needs to grow the territorial gains of Germany and give it to the German people because he believes that Germans need more room, right? Because that they are too densely populated. So he wants to take over more area and repurpose it for German people. So the Germans are going to use the Blitzkrieg against Norway and Denmark. Then they're going to use it against France, Netherlands, and Belgium. And they're going to overwhelm their unmobilized forces, okay? But in May 1940, a big thing happens. And Winston Churchill is going to be elected as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Churchill, as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom in 1940, he offered and brought in an Otto von Bismarck-like character. And he says, I have nothing to offer this position but blood, toil, tears, and sweat, right? And he is credited with being the guy that kind of lifted Great Britain through the war, right? Kept them mobilized, kept them aggressive, and kept their factories running. And he had been speaking out about the rise of Hitler the entire time, right? He actually was a member of parliament all the way back in the First World War, right? And a part of the War Commission during the First World War. And he was an experienced politician. He was a soldier himself and was a phenomenal wartime leader. Regardless of his politics, because some people believe that he was politically less inclined, I disagree. I think he was the right person to lead Great Britain during this war, right? So Germany overwhelms France, though, okay? So the plan is the Germans want to do like the Schlieffen Plan oriented. Knock France out as fast as possible. So they rushed in and they managed to corner an entire British regiment and the entire French regiment behind this thing known as the Maginot Line, which we'll talk about in class, right? So they overwhelmed the French forces at the Battle of Dunkirk, right? And then that led to this thing known as the evacuation of Dunkirk, because as you can see, Nazi troops using their Blitzkrieg methods herded the entire French military forces in northern France, which Dunkirk is in Normandy, right? And they want to set up and create a battle line across the entire coast to protect themselves from invasion by the British, right? They overwhelmed the French forces, but then all of a sudden, they just stopped, right? They set up a perimeter around this area, and the British managed to evacuate the massive, unprepared French army, right? So the German military came in and the German military came in and fought off this unprepared British and French army. And the British are going to evacuate 360,000 troops off the beaches of Dunkirk in northern France. And they're going to use not only naval vessels, but they're going to even use civilian fishing ships. It's known as the Miracle. Now, the weird thing was this Hitler's plan? Did he want to let them leave? Did he plan to let them leave? Because nobody really knows, because all of a sudden the invasion just stopped. It just stopped. He had the French where he wanted them, and he just stopped invading. Now, was this his plan to evacuate this large division of French troops, over 360,000 of them, to isolate them in Great Britain and create this defensive territory? We don't know. Some people say it was a blunder and that he should have kept attacking. Some military historians do anyway. But following the evacuation at Dunkirk, or the Miracle of Dunkirk, right, Germany and Italy are then going to invade France, okay? But I'm talking the northern area of France to try and get to one key city, the place they could never take in World War I. You know it as Paris, right? So Britain was unable to assist them, fearing devastating losses during this invasion. So the Nazis are going to push south from Dunkirk, right? So if we look right here, Dunkirk is actually located in this right here. They push south directly at Paris. And on June of 22nd, 1940, the Nazis forced the French to surrender. That's right. France was out of this war as of June 22nd, 1940.
there is only one ally remaining. It's Great Britain. It's Great Britain. That's the one, right? But there's a massive difference, though, as you can see on this map. This is Vichy France, and this is northern France. The Vichy French refused to aid the French military. They withdrew their forces. They allowed the Nazis to take Paris because they entered into an agreement with Hitler that they would refuse to fight them. So the south of France allied with the Nazis and the Vichy government. A lot of Vichy French soldiers would even fight with the German troops in World War II. And that now only leaves one ally. And Russia is in Hitler's back pocket. So we'll talk about what these implications mean in the next class, but I'll see y'all then. Y'all have a good one.
Exactly. Thank you, Mr. Terry, wearing a bow tie, which, yes, that was a phase and stuff like that. Actually, for years, I used to wear a bow tie every single Friday, right? Like, for, most of my teaching career, I used to wear a bow tie every Friday. But, things change. It is what it is. So the thing about it, though, going into it, okay? So we're at a massive point of this war right now. We basically have gotten into this war where Hitler is taking over most of Eastern Europe, basically unchecked and, no one stopping him. He takes over the Netherlands. He takes over Belgium. He has now successfully occupied France, and the goal of all this Lebensraum, this living space, right? This concept that he believes that Germans need more room and territory, right? Now, another big important thing to understand about this as well is while he's taking over this living space as well, go ahead and jot this down real fast. The Holocaust is beginning to intensify and expand. What Hitler's doing, especially in Eastern Europe, focusing mostly in Poland, he's beginning in 1939, once he invades Poland and splits it with Russia and stuff like that, he begins setting up the very first concentration camps, work camps, and death camps, right? Now, in that process, he's actually going into places like Poland and segregating all of the Jewish people by moving them into what's known as ghettos. And from those ghettos, these walled-in neighborhoods, they will then be transported by train to the camps where they will work, and they will actually work in some factories and then work in these work camps until ultimately ending up in some of the larger concentration camps like Auschwitz, Birkenau, and Dachau, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit later on as well with the liberation of the concentration camps, the Nuremberg trials, when we get into Unit 9, right? So the thing about it, though, that we're now talking about is a lot of big stuff. Now let's take a mental recount of what I just talked about in that last clipped-in flip. The Germans have now successfully taken over most of the continent of Europe, right? When you really think about it, they've taken over France, they have an ally in Spain, they've taken over Germany, their ally is Italy, who is right beneath them, and they've taken over most of Eastern Europe, including half of Poland, and then also most of a couple of other areas as well. Now, going forward, also some of these other guys are going to join up with Hitler, right? The Hungarians, the Romanians, and a handful of other people are actually going to join with the Axis powers, right? Now, right now, they're the tripartite pact, right, between Italy, Japan, and Germany. But the thing about it, though, is as well, who's the only ally left that's actually fighting off the Germans and the Italians by themselves by the early part of 1940, right? It's just the British. And Hitler has a plan for the British, right? The Battle of Britain then begins right after France falls, and it turns into Vichy France and the northern French territory. But important to keep it inside your mind, though, as well, is that those Vichy French actually aid the Nazis in their entire conquest of most of Europe and end up fighting with several of them, right? Now, the Battle of Britain is going to be going down from July to October of 1940. And it was during this time period that Winston Churchill refused to allow the British people to surrender, right? He said, we will not surrender. We will stay calm in the face of all of these different ideas, and we will, not these ideas, of these bombings, because the nature of the Battle of Britain is a massive German air raid campaign that went against the British, trying to cripple them psychologically using those blitzkrieg tactics. The Germans began an air raid campaign bombing the daylights out of Britain, targeting churches, monuments, factories, civil buildings, places where innocent women and children and also innocent people unassociated with the war, where they actually tried to hold on. And we have pictures right here of the Battle of Great Britain. That right there is a school building that was knocked out. This right here is an aerial view of Nazi planes flying over London. That right there is the Old Bailey, which is the old judicial hall in Great Britain. And this right here, of course, just a normal British street that has been bombed out by the Germans, right? And they're trying to push them into surrender, okay? Now, the big thing about it, though, is that they refuse to surrender. And look at this right here. Everything in khaki or dark brown has been occupied by Hitler. And the only ally at war with them is just the British. So it looks as though Hitler and his armies are having a major, major victory moment right here. But the Axis powers are officially formed in 1940 due to the fact that Hungarians, Romanians, and the Bulgarians join up with them. But then we hit a massive turning point in this war. I'm talking about the turning point of all turning points. if Hitler and Mussolini would have been not stupid, and also Hitler was doing a lot of meth at this time as well, so it probably is affecting his brain. The thing about it is they had not been so dumb, and had they read a history book or two, they would have never done what they decided to do. And in October of 1940, they decide to break the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact, excuse me, not October 1940, in June of 1941, they break the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact with Stalin in June of 1941, 6 months before the Americans are about to get involved, right? And he invades the Soviet Union, breaking that pact during his operation known as Operation Barbarossa, right? And in Operation Barbarossa, he goes and sweeps into Eastern Europe in a very, very aggressive campaign, which was so dumb. Like, he was so stupid. And this is a massive turning point in this war because the Soviets are now involved. They're going to begin to push back, right? Now, we're going to talk about this, though, as well. And I'm going to link to get like down in this as well as also just the good John Green crash course video so you know what's coming up and stuff like that as time goes on. But when he goes in there, he begins a campaign of segregating like Slavic people away, doing literacy tests to decide if they will be workers on Nazi farms and things like that, and also begins a campaign of involving them and putting them into concentration camps as well, angering many Soviet and Russian citizens going forward. And the thing about it, though, is the Russians not surrendering in this war when the Operation Barbarossa quickly swept through Eastern Europe is a big reason why the Allies end up winning. But we'll talk about that a little bit more in class tomorrow after we take y'all's little multiple choice quest. But I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.